Welcome to Whisperwood Stories. Today, we read 2 stories from r/nosleep. Let's begin. Our first story is from FearPodcast. I used to work at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. The people that came in were always a little off. When I was working my way through college, I used to work nights at a gas station. I was pretty used to working nights, so this didn't bother me too much. The only uncomfortable thing was that this gas station was on the side of a hardly used highway in northern New York. That being said, my imagination would play tricks on me while I was working alone. The way the shifts worked, I was alone for the last 2 hours of my shift after the subway person had gone home. So for those 2 hours, I would try to pass the time by cleaning and listening to music. I didn't get many customers, but when I did, they were always a bit off. Most notably was a man that used to come in every night and try to buy a Subway sandwich. He would always wait until after Subway had closed for the night and would just stand there in front of the counter. I walk over to him and ask what he would like, and he would say, "I'm hungry. I'd like a sandwich, please." I would tell him that the Subway was closed and he wouldn't react to it at all. He would just stand there. He would wait there, swaying back and forth for about 30 minutes. At that point, he would tell me to have a nice night and leave. I never once saw his car. He would just walk back out and start walking down the highway. This wouldn't be odd if it was a rare occasion, but this happens every night that I work. I've tried asking the manager if anyone else had ever mentioned this guy, but she hadn't ever heard of this guy. I asked her if I could get another person to close with me, but she said that we didn't have enough staff to cover that. Plus, there weren't enough customers to justify the extra person. I tried telling her that this guy made me nervous, but she just told me to man up and try and deal with it the next time that I saw him. That following day, I had to close again, and sure enough, I see the man walk in. He walks up to the Subway counter and waits for an employee. I ask him what he wants, and he says that he wants a sandwich. I decide that I've had enough of this guy coming in and asking for this, so I decide to just try and give the guy the sandwich he wants. He won't specifically tell me what he wants, so I just pick something random from the menu. I tell him that it's going to be $6 for the sandwich, but instead he grabs the bag and runs away. As I'm leaving that night, I see the man in the tree line, waving at me. I'm freaked out by this, but I wave back, hoping that he's just homeless and was happy about the sandwich. I hop in my car and locked the doors. That was the last time that I ever saw the man in the woods, and boy was I grateful for it. A few years later, as I was doing research on true crime stories, I found out that the store that I worked at, during the construction of it, one of the workers had been hurt while he was working alone. The store was supposed to open that following week, and there was a long weekend before that. This was before cell phones were a normal thing that people always had. The man's legs were broken after falling off the roof of the building. He laid there all weekend long and died due to exposure. When I said that this was in the middle of nowhere, it was pretty much in the woods when it was built. This story didn't resonate with me much until I saw the picture of the guy. He looked a hell of a lot like the man that had plagued my nights at the gas station. The worst part was, he wasn't the worst that came in. Our last story is by Roseapple Island. Has anyone ever heard of what happens on the 5th Wednesday of the month? Has anyone ever heard of what happens on the 5th Wednesday of the month? My friend Krista just told me about it. I thought that she was joking, but now I know that that isn't true. Not every month has a 5th Wednesday, so it only happens occasionally. I did the math, and most years have 4 months with 5 Wednesdays in them. Krista seemed surprised that I had never heard about this. She and her husband Mike were shocked, actually. They said everyone they knew was aware of this, and have been since their childhood. Just in case you're out of the loop, like me, let me tell you about this phenomenon. Apparently, on the 5th Wednesday of the month, at 3 a.m., something happens. Maybe you sleep through it. And if so, you're one of the lucky ones. Krista said that she and Mike always take sleeping pills that night, just to ensure that they don't wake up. If you do happen to wake up at 3 a.m., you'll find that you're alone. Everyone in the house has mysteriously vanished. Krista told me about the first time that it happened to her. Her single mother was a heavy sleeper, so she had never warned her daughter about what could happen on this particular date. In the early hours of the 5th Wednesday, Krista woke up with a start. She sensed that there was a feeling of intense darkness, like the moon and streetlights had been extinguished. She flicked on her bedside light and saw that her sister's bed on the other side of the room was empty. The blankets were tucked in neatly, like no one had slept there at all that night. Her sister was only 4, and Krista was instantly worried. She climbed out of bed and wandered down the hall, checking to see if she was maybe in the bathroom. But the whole house was silent. The bathroom was vacant. Krista moved to her mother's room and saw that the bed there was neatly made. Nobody was home. Panicking, Krista grabbed the phone and tried to call her Aunt Jackie, who lived up the street. The phone rang and rang. Over and over, every number she tried resulted in the same. I asked her what she did next, and she told me that she went back to bed. She was terrified, only 6 years old. She hid under the covers until morning, and was surprised to find that her mother and sister were in the kitchen having breakfast, listening to the radio. Everything was perfectly fine. Mike told me that his first experience was pretty similar. His brothers warned him about it, but he wasn't sure he believed them until it happened to him. Mike actually went outside and tried knocking on his neighbors' doors, and no one answered. The streets were vacant, the traffic lights directing no one. The radio stations played static, white noise, with no one there to operate them. Apparently it gets worse over time. The first few times it happens to you, it's just like they described. I called up a couple of other friends after my talk with Krista and Mike, and they echoed their sentiments. Yes, this had happened to all of them. My friend Jen said that it was the 4th time, or maybe the 5th, when it started to change. It was a few years after her first experience. She didn't wake up on every single 5th Wednesday, so it occurred gradually. It was the 5th Wednesday of July. She woke up at 3 a.m. Panic immediately set in as she tried her best to fall back to sleep. The quiet was so thick it was palpable. As she laid in bed, in her completely silent house, then something interrupted. A knock came at the door. Jen told me that she had been warned about this. Numerous older relatives and friends begged her to figure out some way to stay asleep after the first few times. Sure, it was spooky and all to be alone in your house, all alone in the world for a night, but things were going to get much worse. She didn't want to answer the door. The noise was absolutely shocking. Not even her dog was around on previous Fifth Wednesdays. All the birds in the trees usually vanished. The fact that a knock could come out of the intense solitude was wrong. Jen is a brave woman, never one to back down from a challenge. She told me that she was shaking that night, but she grabbed a softball bat and walked to the door. She opened it a crack, looking out on the dark, empty street. That was it. No one was there. She went back to bed, fell asleep, and things resumed normally the next morning. Mike and Krista shared similar stories. They were each a bit older when things escalated to this stage, but they had both gone through similar phantom knocks on their door after a few times of this happening. The three people I talked to told me that once they got to that point, their parents, or in Krista's case, her aunt, stepped in to make sure that they never woke up on a Fifth Wednesday again. The knock from no one is the last time it's relatively safe, apparently. I asked Krista if you can stay up all night to avoid this from happening. She said maybe. Some people she knows have tried, and it seemed to negate it. The problem is that it chips away at their sanity over time. You can only do it every so often, otherwise it will break you down. Mike agreed. Everyone he knows who has attempted this method are struggling severely in pretty much every area of life the more they keep it up. All the other anecdotes come from people they know, friends of friends. See, most everyone is aware of this phenomena, so they know to take their sleeping pills, drink some wine, or skip sleep the nights leading up to it so they pass out the night of the Fifth Wednesday. Everybody knows. For those who tempt fate, or those who mess up in some way, the next Fifth Wednesday after the one where the knock came is critical. The knock comes again on this one, but this time, someone is at the door. The person at the door looks just like you. They share your physical appearance down to the last detail, the smallest freckles and tiniest scars. They have your mannerisms, your physical strength, and are in exactly the same condition as you at the moment. I guess a friend of Krista's who got to this point had a broken leg during that particular Fifth Wednesday, and so did the identical person who knocked on the door. You have a choice whether to let them in or not. They don't force their way in. They stand there and wait while you make your decision. If you close the door on them, then it just keeps happening every Fifth Wednesday that you wake up. They will come back again and again, waiting for you to make your choice. If you decide to let them come in, they'll pass by you without saying a word and then settle into your bed. They fall asleep. Krista told me that this is just a legend. Nobody she knows has done this. They keep closing the door. If you get to the point where your doppelganger shows up, then you know better than to wake up at 3 a.m. on a Fifth Wednesday. You manage that. There are doctors out there who will help you stay asleep on that night when it comes. If something goes majorly wrong and you do awaken, then you can close the door on them. Sure, people who are brave like Jen might answer the door, but who in their right mind would go out of bed and open the door if they knew someone who looked just like them was waiting there? Krista and Mike laughed and told me that at that point, you have no choice. Time seems to slow down. Once you're at that phase where a person is on the other side of the door, they'll keep knocking, and no time will pass unless you get up and answer. You won't be able to get back to sleep. I got home, still reeling from this conversation. I did some Google searches and saw that, yes, there is something that most people know about. Reddit has plenty of posts from people looking for ways to stay asleep on the 5th Wednesday. There were a few who left comments suggesting that they had never heard about this, but we were definitely in the minority. How had it never happened to me? I'm a light sleeper. I've suffered from insomnia my whole life. That said, I don't typically stay up all night. I'm more of the kind of person that lays awake for a few hours and finally drifts off around 2 a.m. Maybe that saved me. I called my mom and asked her about it. She said sure, she knew what I was talking about. She was surprised that I didn't remember. I asked what she meant. She said that around the age of 5, I began telling her about my experiences of waking up at 3 a.m. on the 5th Wednesday of the month to find everyone gone. She and my dad worked to try and keep me asleep, but I was willful. I would pretend to take my cough syrup and then dump it in the sink when they turned away. I'd lie and pretend to fall asleep so they would leave me alone. My mom would try and stay up all night to protect me, but eventually, this started to wear on her, and she had no choice but to stop. A few months later, I told them about the knock on the door, how no one came to call. My mom said that it was the strangest thing. She and my dad told me that the next time this happened, I needed to close the door in the face of whoever was waiting. She even consulted a child psychiatrist. He met with me several times and worked with me to get me to close the door in the face of the identical version of me, if and when it happened. The next 5th Wednesday came, but not until the next school year. My parents and my psychiatrist coached me to close the door, to go back to my room when I saw the person on the threshold. I went to bed, and they all felt confident that I would do the right thing. My mom said that I was cheerful the next morning. She asked me why. That's when I told her I was happy, because the door opened for me, and I had walked through it. I don't remember any of that. Come to think of it, my first memory isn't until later that year. Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. The stories in this video were read and slightly altered with the author's permissions. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit posts. Don't let the shadows get too close.